The notification lit up my phone at 1:47 a.m., piercing the darkness of our bedroom. I had been staring at the ceiling for 20 minutes, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion from 3 days on the road. My wife, Sarah, had kissed me goodbye 6 hours earlier, claiming her sister was having another crisis and needed her to stay over in the city. I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? Her sister's struggles with addiction were real, documented, a part of our lives for years. But the notification wasn't from Sarah. It was from our Nest doorbell camera, the one I'd installed last spring after a package went missing from our porch. Motion detected. Garage entry. 2:13 a.m. I sat up, confusion mixing with the adrenaline already coursing through me. I was home. Sarah was supposedly 30 miles away. So whose motion was my camera detecting? I opened the app with trembling fingers. The live feed showed our detached garage, the one we'd converted into Sarah's pottery studio 2 years ago when her hobby became serious enough to justify the renovation. The interior light was on. Shadows moved behind the frosted glass window. 2 shadows. I felt my throat tighten, a physical constriction that made breathing suddenly conscious work. I checked Sarah's location on Find My Phone, the feature we'd enabled years ago for safety during my frequent business trips. The blue dot showed her exactly where she said she'd be, at her sister's apartment downtown. But someone was in our garage, 2 in the morning, and they weren't alone. I pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt, my movements automatic, my mind racing through explanations that crumbled as fast as I constructed them. A break-in? But the garage door was closed, secure. The side entrance required a code. Sarah's code. Our code. I crept down the stairs, bypassing the creaky 3rd step out of habit, and moved through the dark kitchen. The window above the sink gave me a partial view of the garage. The light was still on. I could see movement now, clearer silhouettes. 2 people. Close together. Too close. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera's cloud storage, scrolling back through the night's recordings. At 11:52 p.m., a car I didn't recognize had pulled into our driveway. A silver Audi. Sarah had gotten out of the passenger side, laughing, carrying her overnight bag. Not rushing, not worried. The driver emerged, tall, athletic build, familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. I knew him. I played golf with him last month at the club fundraiser. Marcus Webb, real estate developer, divorced. He'd shaken my hand and told me how lucky I was to have a wife who supported my career so completely while I was away. The video continued. They hadn't gone to the house. They'd gone straight to the garage. Sarah had punched in the code. Marcus had followed her inside. The door had closed behind them. That was nearly 2 hours ago. They were still there. I should have confronted them then. Part of me screamed to march across the driveway, throw open the door, demand answers in the righteous fury of the wronged husband. But something stopped me. Something cold and calculating that I didn't recognize as myself. I needed to know more. I needed to understand how deep this went. Because Sarah hadn't just slipped out for a quick affair. She'd packed a bag. She'd told me a story. She'd created an alibi. This was planned. Rehearsed. I pulled up the garage's interior camera feed, the one Sarah had installed for her pottery business, supposedly to monitor her kills remotely. I'd forgotten it existed until now. The feed loaded. The image was grainy, angled awkwardly from the corner near her wheel, but clear enough. They weren't making pottery. They were on the old couch we'd moved out there for breaks between glazing sessions. Sarah's head was on his shoulder. His hand traced patterns on her arm with a familiarity that spoke of repetition, of history, of moments I hadn't been present for stretching back further than I wanted to imagine. I felt something crack inside my chest, a structural failure of the life I believed I was living. I checked the time. 2:34 a.m. I had been watching for 20 minutes, paralyzed by a mixture of horror and sick fascination. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Sister's having a rough night. Might stay until morning. Love you. Miss you already. I stared at the words until they blurred. She was texting me from 30 feet away, lying to me while sitting next to him, maintaining the performance with a casualness that terrified me more than the infidelity itself. This wasn't guilt. This was competence. I backed away from the window. I needed evidence. I needed to understand the scope. Because if she could lie this easily, this completely, then the affair wasn't the disease. It was a symptom of something I hadn't yet diagnosed. I returned to my office and opened my laptop, accessing our shared cloud storage. Sarah and I had merged our digital lives years ago. Photos, documents, calendars. I'd never had reason to suspect she'd maintained a separate existence within that shared space. But I started looking anyway, searching for patterns, for anomalies, for the digital breadcrumbs of a double life. What I found in her deleted items folder stopped my breath. She'd emptied it recently, but not completely. The cloud retained fragments for 30 days. Hotel confirmations. Not 1. 6. All from the past 4 months. All booked for weekday afternoons. All within driving distance of my sales territories. She hadn't been waiting for me to travel. She'd been using my travel schedule like a calendar of opportunity, marking my absence as windows of availability. I kept digging. Her location history, which I'd never thought to check, painted a devastating picture. Tuesdays and Thursdays, when I was typically in the field, her phone pinged consistently at an address I didn't recognize. A condo complex on the lake. Marcus's address, I would later learn. But worse than the affair was the documentation I found in a folder labeled Home Reno. Architectural drawings, permits, financial projections. For a property development project I knew nothing about. Sarah's name appeared as primary investor. The capital source was listed as a joint account I didn't recognize. I pulled up our actual bank accounts, the ones I checked weekly, the ones I trusted her to manage while I was on the road. The balances were wrong. Not dramatically, she was too careful for that, but wrong enough. Transfers to the Home Reno account totaling nearly $40,000 over 8 months. My money, our savings, funding a project with her lover that I knew nothing about. At 3:15 a.m., the garage light finally turned off. I watched from the upstairs window as Marcus's Audi backed out of the driveway. Sarah didn't emerge. She was staying in the garage, maintaining her alibi, sleeping in the space I'd built for her dreams, while she built a future without me. I didn't sleep. I spent the remaining hours of darkness documenting everything. Screenshots, downloads. I forwarded the hotel confirmations to my personal email. I saved the architectural drawings. I created a timeline, matching my travel dates to her bookings, to the transfers, to the pattern that emerged with devastating clarity. She wasn't just cheating. She was building something, using my absence as foundation, my trust as scaffolding, my money as capital. At 6:45 a.m., I heard the garage door open. Sarah entered the house quietly, assuming I was still asleep, assuming her performance had worked. I heard her in the kitchen, opening the refrigerator, living the normal life she'd constructed for my benefit. I descended the stairs with a calm I didn't feel. She turned, startled but recovering quickly, her face arranging itself into the mask of the concerned wife. Her sister was better. She'd driven back early to make me breakfast before my flight to Denver. She was wearing the sweater I'd bought her for our anniversary. She kissed my cheek with lips that had been on another man 4 hours earlier. I smelled his cologne on her hair, faint but unmistakable. I said nothing. I accepted the coffee she poured. I nodded at her description of her sister's breakthrough moment in therapy, a fiction she delivered with practiced emotion. And I understood, with a clarity that felt almost religious, that I was no longer married to the woman I loved. I was married to a performance, an algorithm of affection that calculated exactly how much intimacy was required to maintain access to my income, my schedule, my absence. I flew to Denver that morning. I checked into my hotel, and then I began working with a ferocity that had nothing to do with pharmaceutical sales. I hired a private investigator. I contacted a forensic accountant. I reached out to an attorney who specialized in complex asset dissolution, explaining that I suspected my wife of fraud, not just infidelity. Over the next 2 weeks, the picture completed itself with horrifying precision. Marcus Webb wasn't just Sarah's lover. He was her business partner in a scheme to develop lakefront properties using investors' funds. The home Reno project was real, a 4-unit luxury development that had already secured preliminary permits. Sarah had listed herself as married, using my financial documentation as proof of creditworthiness and collateral. She had forged my signature on loan applications. She had presented our joint tax returns as evidence of our combined investment capacity. The investigator found more. Sarah had a previous life I knew nothing about. Before the story she told me of being a struggling artist waiting tables, she had worked in real estate development in Florida, where she had left under questionable circumstances involving a married investor and missing escrow funds. Charges had never been filed. The investor had settled quietly. She had changed her name, not legally, just socially, dropping her middle name and adopting her mother's maiden name as her professional identity. She had rebuilt herself as someone new, someone I had fallen in love with, someone who had never existed. The attorney explained my position. The forged signatures were criminal. The unauthorized transfers were prosecutable. But proving intent would require catching her in the act of completing whatever final step remained in her plan. Because the development project was stalled. The permits were approved, but the construction loan required both spouses' signatures on the final closing documents. Sarah had been stalling, claiming I was hesitant, difficult, that she was working on me. The lender was getting impatient. She needed my signature, or she needed to remove me from the equation entirely. I studied the timeline the forensic accountant provided. The pattern was clear now. Sarah had been escalating. Larger transfers, more frequent meetings with Marcus, urgent messages about closing the loop and finalizing the structure. She was preparing for something, and my next business trip, 4 days in Seattle starting tomorrow, was clearly the window she intended to use. I made a decision. I told Sarah I was leaving for Seattle. I packed my bag. I kissed her goodbye. And then I checked into a motel 6 miles from our house, using a credit card she didn't know I had. And I waited. The first night, nothing. She maintained her routine, her pottery classes, her evening yoga. I watched through the cameras I'd installed weeks earlier, ostensibly for security, now my windows into her real life. The second night, Marcus arrived. They didn't go to the garage. They came into my house. Our house. They sat at my kitchen table with documents spread between them, reviewing plans, laughing, drinking the wine I'd been saving for our anniversary. I watched them on my phone screen, sitting in a motel room that smelled of industrial cleaner, feeling something inside me crystallize into a hardness I didn't know I possessed. The third night, they were more serious. I could see it in their body language even through the camera's limited resolution. Urgency, tension, Marcus gesturing emphatically, Sarah shaking her head, then nodding, then reaching for her phone. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Lender moved up the closing. They need both our signatures by Friday or the loan expires. Can you sign the papers I emailed and send them back? I need this to happen, David. For us. For our future. I didn't respond. I watched her face on the camera as she stared at her phone, waiting for my reply. I saw the moment she decided to proceed without me. She said something to Marcus. He nodded. They gathered the documents and moved to the office. I knew what they were doing. The final piece. The signature that would complete the fraud. She had practiced mine enough times on minor documents. She was ready to execute the forgery that would secure the loan, transfer the liability, and complete her transformation from my wife to my creditor. I left the motel. I drove home with the speedometer pushing limits I normally respected. I didn't call the police. I didn't call my attorney. I wanted to see her face when she realized the game was over. I wanted to witness the collapse of the performance. I parked 3 houses down and walked through the backyard, entering through the basement door whose existence Sarah had forgotten about, the one from before the renovation that still opened with the old key. I moved through the darkened basement, up the stairs, and stood in the hallway outside my office. The light was on. I could hear them. Sarah's voice, low and focused. His signature on the tax returns is the best match. Use that as the reference. Marcus, nervous for the first time. You're sure he won't check? Won't notice the withdrawal? He never checks. He trusts me completely. That's the whole point. I stepped into the doorway. They were at my desk, Sarah holding a pen above a document, Marcus hovering behind her with a stack of papers. The scene was almost mundane, administrative, the banality of betrayal. Sarah looked up first. Her face went through a series of transformations faster than I could track. Surprise, fear, calculation, the desperate search for a new lie to replace the one that had just died. Marcus stepped back, his hands rising slightly, a gesture of surrender he probably didn't realize he was making. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply held up my phone, showing them the screen with the live feed of their activities, the recorded evidence of their conspiracy, the timestamped documentation of their fraud. The lender didn't move up the closing, I said. My voice sounded strange to me, distant and calm. I did. I called them yesterday and told them I was concerned about the project timeline. I asked if they could expedite the paperwork. I wanted to see what you do with a deadline. Sarah's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. The pen fell from her fingers. I've documented everything, I continued. The forgeries, the unauthorized transfers, the false representations to lenders, the investigators' report on your history in Florida. It's all been forwarded to the district attorney's office, and to my attorney, and to the lender's fraud department. Marcus moved toward the door. I didn't stop him. The police are outside, I said. They've been waiting for me to give the signal. I wanted this moment first. I wanted you to understand that you didn't get caught because you made a mistake. You got caught because I let you think you were winning, because I needed to see how far you'd go, how much of my life you'd destroy for your future. Sarah finally spoke, her voice a whisper. David, please. I can explain. It wasn't supposed to. Don't, I interrupted. Don't perform for me anymore. I'm not your audience. I'm not your mark. I'm the man you tried to erase. And I'm still here. The doorbell rang. 3 sharp chimes. Sarah flinched as if struck. I walked to the front door and opened it for the detectives I'd been coordinating with for the past week. They moved past me with professional efficiency, reading Sarah her rights, securing the documents on the desk as evidence, asking Marcus questions he was suddenly eager to answer in exchange for considerations I didn't care about. I watched them lead Sarah out in handcuffs. She didn't look at me, not once. The performance was over, and there was no script for this ending. The house was quiet again. I walked through the rooms she'd curated, the life she'd constructed, and saw it all differently now. The pottery studio in the garage, had it ever been real? The art on the walls, had she chosen it, or had it been selected to project a specific image? The wine in the rack, the books on the shelves, the very architecture of our shared existence. How much had been genuine, and how much had been set dressing for a long con I was only now beginning to understand. I didn't have answers. I might never have them. But as I sat in the kitchen where they'd planned my financial destruction, drinking the anniversary wine they'd opened without me, I felt something unexpected. Not grief, not rage, not even the satisfaction of vindication. Freedom, the crushing weight of suspicion, of doubt, of the slow dawning horror that had built over the past weeks. It was lifting. The truth, however brutal, was lighter than the lie. Sarah would face charges. The development project would collapse. The money she had taken would be recovered, mostly, eventually. Our marriage would end. Not with the whispered negotiations of divorce, but with the formal finality of criminal proceedings and protective orders. And I would rebuild. Not immediately. Not easily. But completely. Because the woman I had mourned that night in the motel room, watching her perform her love for me through a camera lens, that woman had never existed. I had been mourning a ghost. The real work of healing would begin when I accepted that there was nothing to mourn. Only something to escape. And I had escaped. Through luck, through technology, through the stubborn refusal to accept the comfortable lie when the uncomfortable truth was screaming for attention. I finished the wine. I called my brother. I began the long process of reclaiming a life that had never really been mine, building something new on the foundation of a truth I could finally trust. Because I had learned something in those dark weeks that would stay with me longer than the betrayal itself. Trust is not blindness. Love is not surrender. And the person who demands both is not a partner. They are a predator. And predators eventually always reveal themselves. You just have to be willing to see it.